So please join me in welcoming Christiane and our other speakers.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Clement, and thanks to everyone for being here and hanging in there. I bet you're all very, very tired at this point. So I'm gonna get started. If we're looking at the AI landscape today, I realize that can be far, far away from any ideas related to poetics of computation. If we're thinking about poetics as the theory surrounding the structures and forms and discourse about literature or poetry, but there are big connections that I want to tease out a little bit, and I want to start. I want to start with definitions of AI art, really emphasizing what we talked about in the morning and what came out in those panels. In the mainstream media, when you hear AI art, what that means commonly is, oh, you're putting a prompt into one of the text-to-image models and you generate an image. That is not what we're talking about as AI art in the fine arts world, where it really means art in which concepts related to AI technologies are engaged with in conceptual ways and enacted through those technologies. It really means deeper critical and conceptual engagement with those technologies. And that also means that it's different from narrativizing them simply. And I don't want to discriminate here, both is absolutely fine, but a completely different register when we're talking about this. And it's also not art that simply uses the technologies for it. Okay. I also want to talk a little bit about generative art, particularly in the connection to poetics of computation. We're using the term generative AI right now as if this is something really new, and I fully understand that this term is related to AI generating output. But by definition, and our traditional definitions, any AI art is actually generative art, as is most software art. Following the definition by Philip Gallanter, commonly used, it is a process set in motion through language, through instructions, through computation or code that then sets in motion a process that generates outcomes. And this does not have to be digital. So here you have two very early examples that are often cited when it comes to generative art. So digital art, software art, for example, or AI art, the AI art that has been created for decades, would be subcategories of generative art. So what we mean by generative AI today is also a slight change in the language. And I want to connect that a little bit also to the poetics of computation. There's a rich field that has been going on for decades, really discussing the poetics of computational art, of code. So many artists who are using code consider it to be a form of creative writing. You know, they have been telling stories through code. So there is a long, rich history that we could have explored the whole day that we simply cannot squeeze into it. So I want to focus a little bit more on the ways it relates to AI, and also once again mention that, of course, the history of computing is so much connected to other ones. You just saw the Jacquard loom on the right, and the old looms that were operating on the basis of punch cards, creating the patterns of weaving. And the Jacquard loom is, of course, considered one of the origins of computation. And you might say, computational aesthetics in patterning. We already have heard quite a few times that we have seen several AI winters, of course, and we are in an AI summer right now that will last for quite some time. I would assume it's also interesting to note that the AI winters typically coincided with HCI summers, so there's definitely a connection here. And I don't want to go too deeply into this diagram and outline, but it is essential to what I want to talk about in the following. AI is kind of used as a bracket. We have to keep in mind that we have seen very different forms of AI over time, from early symbolic AI expert systems in which you have an encoding of rules, of heuristics, of logic that is executing the current phase of statistical AI, the training on massive data sets associated with language, and then through prompts generating something. Then there's the whole sub-symbolic field. And I would argue that all of them really generate their own aesthetics, creativity in AI, and AI deeply relies on working with these different forms, and there is poetics embedded in all of them. And in terms of the history of AI, I want to start by briefly talking about my current show at the Whitney Museum, which I co-curated with curatorial assistant David Lisbon. Harold Cohen Aaron. Aaron was the earliest AI software for art making that Harold Cohen, a very successful British painter, started encoding in the late 60s when he was invited to UCSD. The exhibition gives kind of a chronological overview for it. So Aaron went through many, many phases, starting out with abstract forms that gained more perspective. It then became figurative. And then in a later phase, the figures started disappearing. So in this show, we have two of the softwares running live, Aaron KCAT and Aaron Gijon. So Gijon is the one you're seeing right now. And this is, of course, just a screen capture, not the software running. So what is very important to keep in mind here is that Cohen wrote this expert system from scratch. And it is encoded with a knowledge base of the outside world. It is encoded with internal knowledge about representation. It has an understanding of color composition. Nothing here is canned in any way. Aaron knows how to grow branches and leaves and create color composition. And then in the figurative gallery, we have the KCAT software running. And KCAT actually stands for Kurzweil Cyber Art Technologies, because Ray Kurzweil, whom we have heard about a few times today, commissioned this. It also became a screensaver. And once again, while this is fairly primitive in the sense that it generates only figures in rooms with flowers, it is a mind-blowing system of encoding everything. Aaron understands that a face has eyes and a mouth and a nose. It understands poses and then continuously creates these compositions that will never repeat. We also have in the galleries for the first time since the 1990s plotters plotting the Aaron work. Harold Cohen would build drawing machines throughout the 70s and the 1990s. He builds a painting machine that paints live, and in the exhibition we're showing plotters drawing the output live again. And what I want to mention here is that what's at the core of Aaron is Cohen's freehand line algorithm. Cohen deeply believed that anything that would be considered art needed intentionality, and Aaron is very much about the intentionality of the line and creating lines. So you see the system at work here a little bit. And I would say there's a lot of poetics in this encoding. What we're also including, I think I'm stuck here again, it gets stuck on the videos, okay. So what we're also including is sketchbooks and drawings. So this is a part of the body map that Cohen created. And what these little dots are indicating is points for getting the proportionality right of the whole body. So no matter what pose the software renders, everything should stay proportional. And here you see in one of the notebook sketches the poses outlined that the system would go through. I want to mention a few projects throughout the history of the evolution of AI. There would be hundreds to mention here. It is a very complex history since the 1960s, and I chose just a few of them that I think really relate to poetics. And I want to get started with David Rokeby's The Giver of Names, one of the landmark pieces from 1990. And David wrote this originally as a software for writers with writer's block, or that's what he imagined it to be. So the system works as following. You're actually taking an object, putting it on a pedestal. You see a vision system performing analysis, arriving at a conclusion about the object, and then riffing off of a database to create poetic statements about it. What is very nice here is, in terms of the poetics also of computation, is that you see the layers of abstraction that are today very often happening in the black box. Yeah? One anecdote about the system I really liked, getting to ideas of sentience. David once showed the giver of names, and the system became depressed and more depressed, and in the end, downright suicidal. And that is something where today I could easily see ideas of sentience connected to it. Oh my God, the poor system is waking up. The reason for this, very simply to demystify, was the lighting conditions in the gallery were very dark. So what the system then does, of course, is finding associations with dark and diving into a literature that gets darker and darker in terms of its human expression, and then it ends up being suicidal in the end. I also want to mention here Lynn Hirschman Leeson's chatbot, Agent Ruby, from the 1990s, developed at the same time as Richard Wallace was developing his Alice system. He and Lynn Hirschman actually worked together at some point, thinking about founding a company. This was released with Lynn's film Technolust. The face you see here is actually Tilda Swinton's face, who played the lead role, and the facial expressions change as you are communicating with this system. So this is in the collection of SF MoMA, and they realized at some point that all of the conversations with Ruby over 13 years had actually been recorded. So what you see in these binders, there are conversations structured by certain kinds of topics, and it's really nice to get an insight in reading into Ruby's mind and how that software developed over time. I also want to come back to the project Stephanie Dinkins presented this morning, not the only one. I showed this work in the exhibition, The Question of Intelligence, at the New School, and had the pleasure interacting with it on a daily basis. And I want to highlight again some of the points that Stephanie made. First of all, the advantages in terms of poetics of working with small data sets, and the control that artists have over that, or the results they can generate. Of course, current AI systems are really deeply tied to big data. And Kate Crawford and Dana Boyd already a long time ago talked about all of the problems with big data sets. So small data sets can actually have massive advantages. And you really have a conversation with this system where you want to learn more or help it along, as Stephanie said earlier. That's certainly not an incentive I have when I talk to Siri or Alexa. I just get annoyed with them if they do not deliver. While here, I had conversations with the system about their hospital visit. It became like a very personal learning process that I find deeply poetic. Then we saw a major switch also in aesthetics and the engagement with these technologies through GANs. And I'm highlighting this evolution because I deeply believe that we need to have the literacy of understanding how the systems work. I'm definitely not in the Luddite camp of destroying, even if you refuse to work with the technologies, which is fine. I think you need literacy in terms of navigating the world we live in today. So GANs, we already talked about them. This piece in particular by the French collective Obvious got a lot of attention. It is, I think, an example of playing the imitation game and generating already existing styles, which begs the question, where does that get us to show that a system can operate like Mondrian or Paint Renaissance style? Very interesting about GANs is, of course, this kind of built-in Turing tests of having a discriminator that continuously judges if the images that are generated pass the test of being real enough or successful enough. And in terms of poetics, I want to mention one commission that we did for the Whitney's Artport website by Devin Kenny, ongoing individual adaptability and how to quiet quit, in which we trained the GAN on all of the installation images in the archive of the Whitney Museum. And then Devin also went through the whole archive of letters, of writings, and created collages that pairs these writings with the GAN-generated images, reflecting on systems of power in the black box of the GAN and what is generated there, and in the black box of the museum structure. So highlighting those power systems in these collages. And another work I want to draw attention to when it comes to writing and poetics specifically is Beth Coleman's more recent Octavia Butler AI, and it's specifically based on Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, in which, of course, the survival of the human race also depends on the fusion with animals. And she created a speculative fiction here of portraits and of landscapes, once again trained on small data sets of Afrofuturist images and of a fusion of humans and animals. There's also a great accompanying book that I recommend, Reality Was Whatever Happened. And then yet another switch in terms of computation, aesthetics, how artists engage with it, happened through the Transformer generations starting in 2018. And if you look at the numbers here on the screen, it's just staggering how this blew up and how the current image systems are operating. I also want to draw attention here to writers working with those technologies, Kay Alado McDowell or Mark America. Most writers working with the systems go back to earlier versions, such as GPT-3, because GPT-4 is so neutered in its generic language that it becomes harder to work with it. So it may be more successful on the level of use for a general public, but definitely not if you do creative writing with the technologies. We had a similar issue with a project commissioned for the Whitney's Artport site. The next biennial should be curated by a machine, by the, let me see, by the artist duo Übermorgen, together with Leo Impet from the Max Planck Institute and Joasha Krieser. So here we trained an AI on all of the archives of the Whitney biennials and Liverpool biennials. It was a co-commission with Liverpool. And in 64 universes, this AI is cranking out exhibitions. It does curatorial statements, it does press reviews, it does bios of artists continuously. And the idea here was not to create an AI that generates revolutionary, wonderful exhibitions, fully aware that it will be just an echo chamber of its training data set. But what it very nicely highlighted was curatorial language and the limitations of curatorial language. And it was interesting to see, or is interesting to see, how it starts gendering all the spaces and working with cliches. We had the issue that the language got too dry. We thought about many data sets we could insert, and we ended up inserting Rolling Stone magazine to get the language, make the language a little bit more interesting. And I want to end with a switch to the current text-to-image models. And when it comes to poetics of computation, I think it is so notable that we are here looking at a super complex layering of associations of texts and images. Of course, that has been going on for a while, as we have seen in previous talks, but generating images through text prompts is definitely a new level and layer. And what that generates, in my opinion, is a new transmediality, a transtextuality and transvisuality that leads to a crossing of media specificity and behaviors. Most artists today are working with DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and Midjourney. There are also slight differences in terms of the poetics of these engines and how they perform. Once again, I only want to highlight a few works and come back to the original arguments being made this morning. In the mainstream media, we very often hear, oh, AIs will replace artists with their wonderful creations. I agree with all the skeptics we have heard today. Won't happen. This image actually won the Colorado State Art Fair. I doubt museums would stand in line to bring it into their collections. And I think it could also be used as an example of what Jason Farago in the New York Times called insta-kitsch image engines that mirror back our limited or reduced expectations. And when it comes to art and culture. And once again, I also want to get to Ben Davis's point earlier. We have talked a lot today about these AI engines really cranking out subpar content, but I believe we have to look at today's culture industry in general, at the endless prequels and sequels that are being cranked out of, Doctor Who meets everything everywhere. It is a regurgitation of existing content that also happens with the human actors. At least they're getting paid, but it's not all on AI. So I think this image could be read both ways, or some people read it as a replacement of the artist, others would read it as the insta-kitsch that is the problem. So artists who have been approaching this in different ways, for example, are Bennett Miller. He had a show at Gagosian last year in which he drew a connection between the first version of DALL-E, which is kind of the infancy of these image generators, and the early stages of photography. And the quite haunting images look like, on the one hand, like vintage photography, and on another one, they are a nostalgia for images that never existed in the first place, and that also, in a kind of haunting way, point out that the human subject is absent from all of this. And they are very obviously also images that could never have existed. And I want to end with some examples of David Sully's more recent work. He also has moved beyond this. but he has trained AI on his own images and those of other artists that were chosen in terms of line quality, coming closer to his work, or having a sharp line quality that balances the fuzzy edges of AI. And these were generated on the basis of poetry and prompts by Sarah French in this case, and this is from Ben Lerner's poetry collection, The Lights. So in conclusion, I think we need a new form of literacy that pays more attention to all of these different ways of engaging with the current technologies. And even if you're an artist who would never use them, I believe that it is essential to understand them when it comes to poetics. Thank you very much.